Fablehaven, Chapter 7, Part 2. With Kendra gone, Seth had got out the equipment he had bundled in his towel, including his emergency kit and the jar he had smuggled from the pantry. The jar was now empty, washed clean in the bathroom sink. Taking out his pocket knife, Seth used the awl to punch holes in the lid. Unscrewing the top, he gathered bits of grass, flower petals, a twig, and a pebble and placed them in the jar. Then he wandered across the garden from the pool, leaving the skimmer behind. If skill failed, he would resort to cunning. He found a good spot not far from a fountain, then took a small mirror from his cereal box and placed it in the jar. Setting the jar on a stone bench, he settled in the grass nearby, lid in hand. It did not take the fairies long. Several flitted around the fountain. A few drifted over, lazily orbiting the jar. After a couple of minutes, a small one with wings like a bee landed on the edge of the jar, staring into it. Apparently satisfied, she dropped inside and began admiring herself in the mirror. Soon she was joined by another and another. Seth moved slowly closer until he was within reach of the jar. All the fairies exited it. He waited. Some flew off, new ones came. One entered the jar, followed quickly by two more. Seth pounced, slapped the lid onto the jar. The fairies were so quick. He expected to catch all three, but two whizzed out just before the lid covered the opening. The remaining fairy pushed against the lid with surprising force. He screwed it shut. The fairy inside stood no taller than his little finger. She had fiery red hair and iridescent dragonfly wings. The incensed fairy pounded her tiny fists noisily against the wall of the jar. All around him, Seth heard the tinkling of miniature bells. The other fairies were pointing and laughing. The fairy in the jar beat against the glass even harder, but to no avail. Seth had captured his prize. Grandpa dipped the wand into the bottle and raised it to his lips. As he blew gently, several bubbles streamed from the plastic circle. The bubbles floated across the porch. You never know what will fascinate them, he said, but bubbles usually do the trick. Grandpa sat in a large wicker rocker. Kendra, Seth, and Dell sat nearby. The setting sun streaked the horizon with red and purple. I try not to bring unnecessary technology onto the property, he continued, dipping the wand again. I just can't resist with bubbles. He blew, and more bubbles took shape. A fairy, glowing softly in the fading light, approached one of the bubbles. After considering it for a moment, she touched it, and the bubble turned bright green. Another touch, and it was an inky blue, and another, it was gold. Grandpa kept the bubbles coming, and more fairies came to the porch. Soon all the bubbles were changing colors. The hues became more luminous as the fairies competed against one another. Bubbles ruptured with flashes of light. One fairy gathered bubbles until she had assembled a bouquet that resembled a bunch of multicolored grapes. Another fairy entered a bubble and inflated it from the inside until it tripled inside and burst with a violet flash. A bubble near Kendra appeared to be full of winking fireflies. One near Grandpa turned to ice, fell to the porch, and shattered. The fairies flocked near Grandpa, eager for the next bubbles. He kept them coming, and the fairies continued to display their creativity. They filled the bubbles with shimmering mist. They linked them like chains. They transformed them into balls of fire. The surface of one reflected like a mirror. Another took the shape of a pyramid. Another crackled with electricity. When Grandpa put the bubble solution away, the fairies gradually dispersed. The dwindling sunset was almost gone. A few fairies played among the chimes, making soft music. Unbeknownst to one of the most of the family, Grandpa said, a few of your cousins have visited me here. None of them came close to figuring out what is really going on. Didn't you give them clues? Kendra asked. No more or less than I gave you. They were not of the proper mindset. Was it Erin? Seth asked. She's a goober. You be kind, Grandpa scolded. What I want to say is that I admire how you children have taken all of this in stride. You have adapted impressively to this unusual place. Lena said we could have a party with goat people, Seth said. I wouldn't hold my breath if I were you. Why was she talking about satires? We found hoof prints in the kitchen, Kendra said. Things got a bit out of hand last night, Grandpa admitted. Trust me, Seth. Consorting with satyrs is the last thing a boy your age needs. Then why did you do it? Seth asked. A visit from the fairy broker is a significant event and carries certain expectations. I'll concede that the merriment borders on foolishness. Can I try blowing bubbles? Seth asked. Another night. I'm planning a special excursion for you tomorrow. In the afternoon, I need to visit the granary, and I mean to take you with me. Let you see a lot more of the property. Will we get to see something besides fairies? Seth asked. Probably. I'm glad, Kendra said. I want to see everything you're willing to show us. All in due time, my dear. From her breathing, Seth was pretty sure Kendra was asleep. He sat up slowly. She did not move. He coughed weakly. She did not twitch. He eased out of bed and crossed the attic floor to his dresser. Quietly, he opened the third drawer down. There she was, twig, grass, pebble, flower petals, mirror, and all. In the dark room, her inherent glimmer illuminated the entire drawer. Her tiny hands were splayed against the wall of the jar, and she looked up at him desperately. She chirped something in a twittering language, motioning for him to open the lid. Seth glanced over his shoulder. Kendra had not budged. Good night, little fairy, he whispered. Don't worry. I'll feed you some milk in the morning. He began shutting the drawer. The panicked fairy redoubled her frantic protestations. It looked like she was about to cry, which made Seth pause. Maybe he would let her go tomorrow. It's okay, little fairy, he said gently. Go to sleep. I'll see you in the morning. She clasped her hands together and shook them in a pleading motion, begging with her eyes. She was so pretty, that fiery red hair against her creamy skin. The perfect pet, way better than a hen. What chicken could set bubbles on fire? Closing the drawer, he returned to his bed.